Malo minglaba. Ngana mago Sophia-Helene chapate. Yenenga matwe chongpyo soche. I am so sorry about that. Hello, my lovelies. I'm Sophia-Helene, and this is obviously welcome back to my channel. This isn't Burning Questions. So I thought I'd do something a little different. You know, I've dedicated most of my channel to appearing to be an authority on a lot of things. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Despite what my parents, my friends, my roommates, my rabbi, my therapist, and pretty much anyone I've ever dated would say, I am in fact 100% human and I make mistakes. So what I wanted to do today was talk about the biggest mistake I've ever made. Really consequential mistake. Like, it's hands down. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. The most consequential mistake I ever made wasn't actually something that, like, it's my fault. It's not my fault that thousands of people are dead and hundreds of thousands are displaced, but I am on the wrong side of history and I want to talk about it. Now, the situation that led to this state of affairs is extremely complicated, and it always has been. So in order to really get a good feel for why I made the mistake that I made, we have to go back a little ways. In 1787, Emperor Bodapaya, the sixth ruler of the Kongpang dynasty, had some troublesome neighbors, China and a resurgent Siam. So, like any imperial leader who is in danger of getting economically and militarily muscled out would do, he captured new territory. Specifically, he captured the kingdom of Arakan. Remember that. It'll become relevant again. So, this new conquest redefined the socioeconomic landscape for Kongbang because it gave them a poorly defined shared border with British India. So facing increased pressure from Siam, Bodapaya also conquered and annexed Assam in 1817 and then strongly exerted influence on the state of, or the kingdom of Manipur as well. Now, the problem is that the Kongpang occupation tended to produce a lot of refugees. So, and Assam is a major tea and silk producing region. So the British had an interest. They financed some revolutions, and longer story shorter, the British redrew the lines in 1833 and went to war. By the way, the empire, the Kongbang dynasty, ruled over a country called Myanmar, and the ethnic people who were the majority there were called the Bama. So Burma, we're talking about Burma here. Anyway, 3 wars later, Bodopaya's great-great-great-grandson, Thibaut, lost the Third Anglo-Burmese War and ceded control of the entire country to the British in 1885. British occupation was unpopular and was fiercely resisted. A man calling himself Aung San went to China and then to Japan and to form a revolution movement. He founded the Burma Independence Army in Bangkok in 1935. Hang on to that tidbit, it's going to be important. So he sided with Japan through most of World War II, and the Japanese installed him as the war minister of the first state of Burma, which was really just a puppet state for the Japanese. And while in that position, he met and married Qin Chi. She went on to become the ambassador to India, and they had 4 children together. Keep an eye on that last kid. She'll be important. Anyway, Aung San's army was renamed the Burma National Army. However, Aung San soured on Japan, and so he reached out to his old friends, the British, to help them expel Japan during World War II. The British, as they are wont to do, stuck around. And so Aung San left the military and set up a civilian resistance, which culminated in an agreement granting Burma independence in 1947. Thoroughly a hero, and decidedly with still much to do, he was assassinated while at work a little under 6 months after Burma gained independence. And he was interred in the Martyrs Mausoleum. Then in 1962, there was a coup d'etat that overthrew the elected state and installed a totalitarian one-party state in Myanmar. 4 months after pro-democracy protests in 1988, Kin Chi would die from a massive stroke. She's interred near the Shwedagon Pagoda, which is probably one of 3 things that you know that you've seen from Myanmar. So yeah, that's that youngest child that I told you about that would become important. Her name is Aung San Suu Kyi. She took part in the 1988 uprisings, which ended in a bloody coup that installed a military junta under the name of the State Law and Order Restoration Council. And that's a mouthful. This junta actually held elections in 1990, and Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy won 81% of all the seats available. Which, of course, you know, from our jaded modern perspective, we know how the story ends. The results were annulled, and anyone with their ear to the ground on affairs in that part of the world will know that Suu Kyi was placed under long house arrest. Okay, so why the hell did I tell you all that exhaustive history? Because I need you to understand how big and important the military is to the Burmese. It's a national point of pride. It's a patriotic symbol. Even though the SLORC and its follow-on, although they really only just changed the name, the State Peace and Development Council, tarnished its reputation and drove Myanmar into international seclusion with its internal repression. More on that in a minute. The people still love the military. So, what the f*** did I do? Well, I was a military analyst, and we passed close enough to Myanmar that it became relevant to be aware of any geopolitical or military stuff in the country, at least for a while. And I kind of became obsessed. I learned everything that was available to me, which, I mean, meh. Keep in mind, this was like 2006. People were still rock hard to kill Al-Qaeda. And if I was going to continue to study Burma, I would need an intersection in order to do that. Otherwise, I'd have to move to prepping Marines to go kill some... The Department of Sophia's would like to note that Sophia's woke stage is only a few years old, and before she transitioned, while she was in the military and while she was involved with toxic Christianity, she would often adopt the vocabulary and habits of other service members, many less woke even than she. This cutaway is designed to cover over some pretty problematic language, and embarrassing language used on her part. We now return you to your regularly scheduled bummer, terrorists. And that wasn't just, and that wasn't me. I mean, we had a pretty good beat on those guys, and I did my due diligence keeping up with it, but this Burma thing just kept eating at me. You have to remember, this was a very different time, a time when no one with a coherent memory didn't remember 9/11. And now, I personally never took the Muslim minority angle in convincing my bosses that the security situation was worth paying attention to. Because even then, fundamentalist, right wing shit sleeve that I was, even I recognized that that would be an incredibly poor taste. So I went more with the stability and development are critical to combating the rise of extremist nationalism. And it works. And I was kind of right. I was mostly right about that. At the time, it didn't appear that people from rich liberal democracies had any motivation to join terror organizations. We found out later that that wasn't necessarily the case. Again, this was way before ISIS was a big thing. And I gotta tell you, I loved Suu Kyi. I reported furiously, frequently on the long-suffering Suu Kyi, and my bosses took a genuine interest for several reasons, not all of which were related and not all of them were in good taste. But we'll come back to that. There's a restaurant in San Francisco, wonderful place called Burma Superstar. It's always crowded after 4, but if you can get a table, it's kind of amazing. The food is profoundly good. One of my fondest memories is sitting in this restaurant. All the windows, the doors were open, fans were blowing, our skins were dewy, we weren't sweating though. Mint jasmine iced tea soothes the heat. I bit into a lotus chip. The batter was spicy, and the world bustled around me inside the restaurant and out. And at that moment, for reasons that I don't completely understand, I felt pretty good about the world, about my life. As I left the restaurant about an hour later, I noticed that at the entrance, there was a little gift shop selling t-shirts with Suu Kyi's face on them. I didn't buy one. I thought they were a little gaudy for the price. But all the proceeds went to democracy, to support democracy in Burma, which at the time was supporting Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy. As I said, though, I was taken with Suu Kyi. She seemed to me to be kind of a Gandhi figure, kind of monument to what dignified and peaceful resistance could do in the face of the brutality of the Tatmadaw, the military. I saw her as the Tiananmen Square protester, alone in front of a tank column, without support, determined to do what was right and damn the consequences. I was a certified Suu Kyi stan, and I wasn't alone. There was an entire movement around her and the promise of democracy that she presented. And in 2010, she was released from her house arrest. Her party eventually took control of the National Assembly in Burma, and for a while, everything looked really good. Everyone was really hopeful. Which is why it was so disappointing to see this shit.
Fergal, this question has been asked since 2013, when the last round of troubles broke out in the Rakhine. And they would ask me questions and I would answer them, and people would say I said nothing, simply because I didn't make the kind of statements which they thought I should make, which was to condemn one community or the other.
Hey, real quick, former idol of mine, how hard is it to call a genocide a genocide? And does that super matter that there are more than one side? I mean, of course there are. Every genocide has two sides by any reasonable definition of the term. And, in the interest of being fair, and in the defense of the first counselor, that's her title, she did mention that it was difficult because, and here we're going to test how much you remember from the history section, we're going to pull back that military thing. The military is so massively popular in Myanmar that it's actually written into the constitution that they are not under civilian authority. So it's almost like Myanmar has two governments. Well, two arbiters of force is a better way to put that. And they also are her kind of political enemy. And they have been known to violently coup some people. So I get that it's a difficult position and all, but Suu Kyi, you took part in the 88 uprising. What gives? What is so much different now? All right, I forgot to mention that. Right now, 98% or half of you are laughing your asses off, and I know that 98% of the people who aren't laughing think I put a typo in there or I'm confused. Stop it. I'm deadly serious. And so are these bastards. So let's talk about Buddhist terrorism. Seems like a contradiction, right? Well, depending on how you read it, ostensibly the same could be said of Christian, Islamic, Jewish, Asatru, Hindu, or any other religious extremism. Things change when you add radicalization into the mix. It's no longer about faith. I mean, exceedingly complex justifications about the permissibility of violence get made into a framework for belief, but it's not about religious belief. My observations have been for some time that the brick and mortar of religious terrorism isn't actually religion, it's identity. Well, and it's also a charismatic leader. Enter Asemwe Ratu. According to the New York Times, Asemwe Ratu, who describes himself as a nationalist, says Buddhism is under siege by Muslims who are having more children than Buddhists and buying up Buddhist-owned land. Boy, that sounds really familiar, doesn't it? In part, he's tapping into a historical grievance that dates from the British colonial days when Indians, many of them Muslims, were brought to the country as civil servants and soldiers. Another conflict, by the way, that I am just way too invested in, the Sri Lankan Civil War, also has its roots in this genuinely terrible idea. The British did this a lot and it backfired a lot. Asemwe Ratu tapped into that anxiety, which some describe as the demographic pressures coming from neighboring Bangladesh, also a Muslim country. There's a wide disdain in Myanmar for a group of about 1 million stateless Muslims, sort of stateless, who call themselves Rohingya, some of whom migrated from Bangladesh, again, sort of. Clashes between the Rohingya and Buddhists last year in western Myanmar roiled the Buddhist community and appeared to have played a role in the later outbreaks of violence throughout the country. Asemwe Ratu said they served as his inspiration to spread his teachings. In Mawlamyine, a multicultural city southeast of Yangon, a monastery linked with the 969 movement, they are terrorists, has established courses of Buddhist instruction for children, which it calls Sunday Dhamma schools. Leaders of the monasteries there seek to portray their campaign as a sort of Buddhist revivalist movement. The main thing is that our nationality and religion do not disappear, said Asin Zadila, a senior monk at the Myazeri Nano monastery outside the city. Okay. Shitty viewpoints all around, for sure. Turns out great replacement theory is less of an isolated phenomenon and more of a grand unified theory, and how worrying about who's on top makes you an irrecoverable prick. But how does that connect to violence? Wiratu justified the violence, saying the Rohingya were planning to establish an Islamic state in Rakhine. Rakhine used to be Arakan. We got there. He has since urged non-Muslims to boycott Muslim shops and avoid doing business with Muslims. Your purchases spent in their shops will benefit the enemy. Boy, that sounds familiar, doesn't it, Tucker Carlson? Wiratu also said in a 2013 YouTube video, So do business with only shops with 969 signs. Yes, only do business with the best of terrorists. Yeah, this guy's been called the Burmese Bin Laden, and I kind of agree. Okay, but enough about. But is that enough to make a bunch of peace-loving, saffron-robed Dorcases go on a killing spree? Oh, oh, oh my! Oh God! Oh. Why? Why, God? Mm. There's a there's a lot more, but I think you get the point. So that's the other thing that the Burmese are really proud of. The other thing that the Burmese are really proud of is the fact that they've been a Buddhist nation for centuries, and they're a deeply religious country. Now, the cleverest and most observant of you will have noticed that some of these go back as far as 2013. These are not new occurrences. I mean, they're new relative to when I studied it with all of the intelligence apparatus of the US government. Yeah, but like they've been at this for a little while, is my point. And I should have seen it coming. I mean, I said it in as many words, right? Peace and development are important to eliminating extremism. I just cynically implied the wrong kind of extremism. In the wake of the ongoing attempted genocide of the Rohingya people in Rakhine State, which again used to be Arakan, told you we get there, Suu Kyi continues to waffle on the crisis. It's created a refugee flow of nearly 750,000 people into neighboring Bangladesh. The government there has set up refugee camps, most notably at Cox's Bazar. And last year, Bangladesh gave their word that refugees were not going to be sent back. It's been the only good news in this entire parade of shit. But the problem with what to do with them remains a vexing one. Several marginally acceptable solutions are currently being considered, but progress is painfully slow, and in the meantime, the Rohingya live in squalor in internally displaced person camps in Myanmar and refugee camps in Bangladesh. Between the military's autonomy and clear hatred of the Rohingya and the Buddhist distrust of Muslims, which the Rohingya mostly are, it would be easy to regard Suu Kyi's position as simply beleaguered. But she equivocated on camera to you and to me and to the entire world between the genocidal and their victims. She's not the hero of democracy I hoped she was. And recently, her government has detained 2 American journalists who were working for the Washington Post on trumped up charges of violating the nation's state security laws. As of January 25th, the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Myanmar stated that in response to the Rohingya refugees, Myanmar is making no effort to prepare for their return, but is instead engaging in a sustained campaign of violence, intimidation, and harassment. End quote. She's becoming the people who tortured her for all of those years. And perhaps with the 2020 vision correction that is hindsight, that makes a certain level of sense. It's the same haunting over and over again, repeated and long-term trauma. People tend to play it out, try to make sense of it in their own minds, but they just perpetuate that violence on others. Anyway, I was wrong about Suu Kyi, and so were a lot of people. And because so many people were wrong about her, 725,000 people live like this. So what's the lesson? What do we take away from this turd in the punch bowl? I don't know, it's a mess. I guess just be kind to each other. Thanks for stopping in. This was a real bummer.